In the present economic situation, the government, the United States, now has a $60 billion trade deficit for automobiles. In 1955, less than 1% of our automobiles were foreign. But in '69, there was an oil embargo by OPEC, and gas prices went very high. Caused me to leave IBM and take a job closer to my home, for example. Is a major problem. Gas lines, you can only buy gas on even or odd days dependent upon your license plate number. It was a mess, trust me. And there were small cars in the country from both Toyota and Nissan, which was called Datsun at the time. And those cars had a huge inventory because nobody had been buying them before. They had all been buying U.S. cars. But they got great gas mileage and they were cheaper. So in 1970, a huge number of cars sold were foreign cars, something like 22%. And in California, it was 50%. And they were cheaper and they were more fuel efficient. I remember that my parents went to buy a car. I expected them to come back with a pickup truck because we're country folks. And instead they came back with two cars, a little tiny station wagon and a little tiny truck. Both of them were Datsuns. And the price for both of those cars together was the same as one American truck. And they got better fuel economy at the same time. So we went from being a one-car family to a two-car family simply because the foreign cars were available and cheap. Also, the $50 billion a year chip industry, which feeds the $750 billion electronics industry, is also in a trade deficit situation. Competition comes from chip makers across the globe, in China, England, etc. So in the 2010s, because of this increased competition from foreign countries, the United States started to increase its emphasis on corporate consortiums or cooperation between corporations. Now remember, the antitrust laws are designed specifically to avoid this. But they needed to maintain their lead with rapidly changing technologies, and that frequently includes a lot of different companies with very specific skill sets. And they wanted to address the increased competition abroad. It is not clear that consortiums is the answer to our foreign competition problem, but it is clear that we do have a foreign competition problem. Some people believe that the focus on consortiums is masking a different problems with our workforce, problems with our ethics, problems with our designs that we are not addressing because we're looking at consortiums instead. There are other differences, but they don't seem to have played out in the foreign competition game. They don't seem to have won. Japan, in their workforce, focuses very specifically on a person concentrating very hard on one small area. So an engineer might know everything about a carburetor. Whereas in the United States, the engineer might know a lot about an automobile, but not everything about every particular component. Japan has very dedicated experts in every field. In that case, consortiums can be very strong, and the Japanese government doesn't keep them. In fact, it encourages them and pays them and supports them to build new technologies. But the Japanese, although wildly successful in the 80s and 90s, have not been able to keep up with China. In India, they have 10 million IT workers. And don't forget, Google only has 85,000 employees. They have 10 million IT workers. They have one of the largest workforces in the world, and it costs 3 to 4 times less than if you purchased it, for example, in the United States. IT has been used to transform the country. Indian politicians albeit just as corrupt as ours probably, did understand that they had a very large country with a ton of people to feed, and they needed some specific ways out. They're still working on very specific things. They're working on roads, road infrastructure, which we have from the Eisenhower Initiative after World War II. So all of our interstates that were designed for Eisenhower's request, because he had had too many armies stuck in the mud, all of our road infrastructure from state to state, our interstate system. India is trying to figure out how to build something like that. That's one of their most important initiatives right now, and they're also trying to continue to improve their schools all the way through university and research. But for jobs, they looked at IT. They had a couple of really good things going for them. They already spoke English because they were British. They value education. It really isn't something that has been traditionally valued in the United States. Right after they won their independence after World War II, they built the India Institutes of Technology, just like MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, only this is India's Institute of Technology. And these are some of the best universities in the world. They also sent their best students to MIT and then hoped that some would, and they did, come back and teach at the IITs. The country also has a history of the love of mathematics. And this is from a very critical book that was written, I'm going to say 1600 years ago, but I really don't know that number too well. And it was a book written with a bunch of math problems. It was just a book of problems. Think of them as brain teasers, but they were more focused on exact algebraic solutions. And it was written from a father to his daughter. It wasn't written from a father to his son. So a father and his daughter must have both liked math puzzles. So in India, they have sort of a traditional belief that women are better at mathematics than men. And it's because this book was written for the little girl. And they have a strong college system. They did not achieve that strong college system the same way the United States did, which is over the last 400 years building stronger and stronger universities. In fact, they realized that they could not, and they did not have the financial wherewithal to build a strong college system, so they privatized it. They allowed anyone who wanted to build a college. So there are colleges all over the country. They have mostly master's degree teachers, a few PhDs. They teach at the BS level, and they teach limited numbers of subjects, computer science being one of the most popular. The way they convinced these people to build these colleges is they guaranteed a given number of students, and they paid the tuition for all the students. So they made free college tuition for India. You just have to get into a college. And then they gave financial incentives, not up front because they didn't have upfront money. They gave financial incentives by literally paying the tuition of every child who could get into that college. So people who had money built colleges, whether they knew anything about academic institutions or not, because they had guaranteed income for a long time. And the colleges are kind of cute. I've visited several of them and worked with some of the people. And I stayed in, actually got to stay in the presidential palace in India, which was pretty cool during one of my visits, and spent the night talking with one of the members of parliament from southern India about how important it was to build this college system. And he also was focused on the road system, but he had no solution for that because they didn't have enough money to build an interstate system. So India spent a lot of time developing their IT. Kind of started in '68 with Tata Consultancy Services, TCS. They built it, and in 1974, they were able to make an agreement with Burroughs Machines to outsource their work. That consultancy service currently is a $16 billion industry. In 1981, they founded Infosystems, and they developed an IT business model, including, dare I say, helplines that became popular in India. The important part here for the United States and what is ethical for our companies is that all of this economic growth was under the control of the government. The government funded it. The government decided what companies could do what and where best to put their resources. And by doing so, the government ensured that there was no competition. In 1991, India instituted some economic reforms enabling these companies to, I shouldn't say enabling, but enabling competition so that these would not be the only monopolies, and they hoped that would lead to further growth. They also formed, the government also formed the software technologies parks, which gave satellite links to tech companies so that smaller companies could, in fact, get on the internet and do things. Another thing that helped India's IT development was the shift from very large centralized computers to personalized computers and distributed computing. In this way, they could give a PC to a good programmer, and that programmer could do a lot of work. Also, right before the millennium, there was worry about computer programs possibly having programmed only for the year, like I might say 68 instead of 1968. So that was called the Y2K bug. I know it's not 2K, it's just 2000, but it was the year 2000. And they were worried that programs might have omitted the 19, and that would make them crash in the future. So an awfully lot of companies spent enormous time going through all of their code looking for any instances where they might have had the Y2K bug. The world was supposed to come to an end because all the computers would stop because of this bug. Only a few computers, in fact, stopped, and they didn't find that many, but they spent an enormous amount of money on this bug, and a friend of mine made a lot of money, so good for him. Currently, 6% of the gross domestic product of India is IT. The National Democratic Alliance political party has adopted IT as its top priority. And in 1999, they denationalized the telecommunications sector. They felt that the country was strong enough to be able to compete. China, another one of the countries that is not causing part of the competition with the United States, now has the #1 economy in the world, according to the International Monetary Fund. Their model of development has been emulated in Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, etc., with less success. For example, for a while, Brazil was going to be one of the emerging economies. Its growth was taking off the charts, and they continued to sort of emulate China, and so they encouraged a lot of their citizens to buy on time, to use credit to purchase things that Brazil had not had in large quantities. So all of a sudden, families could buy refrigerators and other appliances that had been too expensive for your average Brazilian family. China experienced an almost uninterrupted, decades-long economic expansion. But Brazil, just as it did it encouraged everyone to buy the appliances on time, experienced an economic contraction. And people lost jobs. They couldn't pay for their appliances. And they had also gotten the contract for the Olympics, and they were having trouble paying for that. I will stop here and move to the next video.